Welcome to Vintage Books Live. This is Christy Peterson, and I'm here tonight with Heather Redmond. She has a brand new book that's coming out just today called Death and the Sisters. And we're going to talk to her about the book tonight and her writing process and other things she might have up her sleeve for the future and all kinds of good stuff. But let's start like we usually do and just tell me a little bit about this particular book, how it came to be, and a little bit about what it's about.
Sure. So this book is Death and the Sisters, and it's the first book in my Mary Shelley mystery series. I seem to have a line now on making real people amateur sleuths and mystery novels. And this time I've gone back to Regency England, 1814 to be exact. And I'm looking at the life of Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin Shelley, who is known as the mother of science fiction and the author of Frankenstein most famously. And I'm starting my story when she's 16 years old and filling in the blanks to try to figure out what she was up to the summer of 1814 and how she came to a point where at 19 she'd be writing Frankenstein.
All right. And I believe she meets Percy Shelley in the book.
Yes.
That's correct. I was trying to think. Flap copy is innocuous and doesn't give too much away, right? So I think that's in the flap copy.
Yes.
So I think the first question that I'm really curious about, beyond this particular book, but in your work in general, is so you're starting a new series where Mary Shelley's the main character, and you've done a series in the past where it's Charles Dickens, right? In the past.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really curious, what drew you to start writing mysteries about using characters that are real, that were real people, instead of just making up a character? I'm just curious, what was the appeal of that to you?
I think to some degree it becomes a marketing thing, because if you can hang a book on somebody people have heard of, then it makes it easier to just get people to notice you in a crowded marketplace. But originally I was writing 19th century romance, and my editor moved on to a mystery publisher. And editors being the people that buy you and form a working relationship with you as a writer, you want to follow your editor as much as possible. So not knowing what would happen at my publisher, I started pitching mystery novels because now he was a mystery editor. And I gave him 3 ideas. And one of them was Charles Dickens as an amateur sleuth, because I had just been writing a historical romance called The Princess Dilemma. And the hero is loving Charles Dickens books. And the story is set in 1837. So he's reading the Pickwick Papers and Oliver Twist. And so there I was at this moment, having just written that, having Dickens fresh on my mind. So I pitched that, and that was what the editor was interested in. And then ultimately I ended up selling the series back to my regular publisher that he had left. So
that's
so kind of ironic. And then Regency England is just really enduring interest for readers. It's an incredibly popular period. We have the actual Regency, which was 1811 to 1820, and the literary Regency, which is like 1780 to 1840. So I thought I would move back in time and looking at what's on my bookshelves and what is out there in popular culture being referenced. And I saw Frankenstein. I don't even know where that book came from, the original skinny little paperback on my shelf.
Yeah.
But it just made sense to work with her next.
So how do you, so were there, I think you said you had just written a book where the person liked Dickens, and that's what ended up with Dickens. So for Mary Shelley, it was just having Frankenstein on your shelf and kind of going, oh, well, she'd be good.
And yeah, just, who has name recognition? I like writing the 19th century because it's such a period of change and interest, and who might be out there. Like I looked at people like Abraham Lincoln. He'd already been done like 3 times. So I was also looking for someone that hadn't been approached before. Jane Eyre was being used as an amateur sleuth back, I think, in the 90s when, I was first buying mostly my own books. So she's kind of off limits because
Yeah,
that series by
yeah,
Stephanie Barron's gone on, for decades.
yeah, yeah,
And then the Brontes have been done as well
yeah, yeah.
recently.
That's what I was thinking as I was writing out questions ahead of the interview was, what was it that made you choose those two as opposed to other people? And those were some of the people that came to mind. And I thought, well, they probably, there's been more done with them, both with mysteries and just in general. They're
Right.
so
I remember
much
back to the
well done.
90s reading like time slip type books with the Brontes in them. They've been very popular main
Yeah,
or side
yeah,
characters for a long time.
yeah, yeah. How do you, when you're, well, I should ask you first, are you the kind of person that plans out a book ahead of time? Or do you pants it more and just kind of write? Because that'll inform my next question.
The only time I was ever a pantser was when I was writing really sexy novellas. So they were like 7 chapters long and I could keep it in my head. But
Yeah,
to write
yeah,
a full novel, I am someone who comes up with about 60 scenes after I've kind of started doing some crime fiction worksheets. And then I abandon those and I use my 60 scene method. And then
yeah,
after I do that, I try to write an outline of 3,000 to 5,000 words and have it make sense to me. And it never does. Like my outline makes like such a pretty little picture. And then I try to narrate it and nope, there's a whole lot missing. And
yeah,
then ultimately I write the book and nope, there's still some things missing, but
yeah,
at least I've got like the short story version of the novel to work from.
yeah, yeah. And that the only reason I asked that was because I was thinking about, if you take a historical figure, I mean, you're not writing nonfiction, so it doesn't have to be, all accurate. But how do you decide as you're going through the planning process, or even as you're writing the novel itself, how closely to stick with particular historical stuff? And how do you decide, that doesn't really work, let's do this instead?
So, generally speaking, with both of these series, I started out as accurate as I know how to be based on my research. And at this point in my life, I'm old enough that I probably know more than the average person on these subjects, just because I've been, studying this for so long. I'm writing about the becoming phases. I'm not coming into Mary Shelley's life in that famous summer of 1816 that everybody thinks they know about when Frankenstein came to her in a dream. And I'm not writing Dickens after he became so famous that there are literally spreadsheets with where he was every single day. So I'm writing when they're young and there's still holes in their story, but they're still fascinating. Yet there's room for questions because we don't have their diaries. We don't have their letters. Generally speaking, that those early materials have been lost. So there's plenty of room to throw in a mystery,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
also some people that don't exist in real life as their side characters, which is
yeah,
why I do a cast of characters at the beginning so you could see who I made up and who I
yeah,
didn't.
yeah. Yeah, because it's always interesting to me when you're doing historical fiction, because a lot of times people will do historical fiction and the like cast around them, the cities around them and everything will be based on historical fact, but the actual main characters themselves won't be. So it's always interesting to me when people take actual characters, the actual people, and how do you decide
Yeah,
what?
in this series, the main characters are all real. In the Dickens series, a lot of my so-called Scooby Gang was not.
Okay.
We both have coughs tonight. It's pollen
Yeah,
season
yeah,
here in the
I know it.
Northwest.
Let's see. I'm sorry, I lost my place in my list. Are there other considerations when you're deciding like what historical facts to include and what to sort of embellish on besides just the story itself?
As someone who's writing about real people, you're always fighting that novelish thing of this era, which is characters have to grow and change. And yet I'm writing about real people who grew and changed on their own timeline in their own way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I have the less known people who are real, but we don't know much about them. And they tend to have things going on that I'm just completely making up, or I'm, 60% making up. So there's a lot more room there. And for instance, we don't know what Mary Shelley was writing when she was young, because everything up until like 3 months after this point was lost. So I'm just completely making up the kind of stories she might have written. We have no idea. So as an author, I could just have complete license, and I narrate the story in 2 point of views, Jane Clairmont, her stepsister, and Mary Shelley. And Jane tried to be a novelist at the same time as Mary and failed. And the one novel we know she completed is lost to time, at least now. Could show up in somebody's attic. You never know.
Yeah, that seems to happen.
So most of what we have about Jane, who became Claire Clairmont, is commentary from her in her great old age, because she lived by far the longest of these people. So even then it's like, well, that's what she believed at 70. What did she think when she was 16? So I've gone all kinds of places with Jane as the person who's narrating 50% of the book versus Mary, who I know more about. And I'm trying, my fictional Mary, I'm trying to be as close to the real Mary as I am capable of. Also trying to remember what it feels like to be 16, because boy, that's a lot different from where I'm at my time of life.
Yeah. I always think about that too, is how different is it to be 16 now, or even when we were 16, as opposed to 100 years ago, when the expectations of a 16-year-old were entirely different. And how
and
that
just being a
must
woman.
a couple hundred. Yeah, exactly. When you are writing a mystery, I've gotten to talk to several mystery people on through this, and I've started asking this question because I'm always intrigued by everybody's process for creating the mystery itself, because not only are you writing a book and giving yourself the challenge of writing about a real person and trying to keep it believable that it's really her, and trying to keep it as accurate as humanly possible from what we know, but you're also writing a mystery that has to be a believable mystery that makes you want to know what's going to happen, and red herrings and twists and turns and all of that. How do you plan that? Is that something that you plan out ahead of time, when you're like, okay, here they're going to find this and then this is going to happen? Or are you more concerned with the story first and then sort of weaving the mystery into it? How does that work for you in your process?
Well, probably the first thing I'm doing is picking a timeline, because these are real people. Like with one of my Dickens books, I knew he'd written a famous article about a famous fire. So that was a perfect spot to start a mystery in real time in his real life. With Mary Shelley and her family and friends, I ultimately wanted to know why things happened the way they did on July 28th. So I was going back in time and trying to fit a crime fiction version of why they got to the point of making the decision they did on July 28th in 3 books, because I have 3 books that I've sold at this point. So I know kind of the timeline I want to start at, and then I figure out a setting and who's going to die, remembering that I'm writing series, so that has to be different in each book. I can't kill a young man in each book. That has to be varied. And then you have to think about the timeline of before the crime. What led up to the moment where there's going to be a body? That's hugely important, and something I didn't realize as a reader. I had to become a writer to understand the critical nature of that. And then I start figuring out who my suspects are, motives, means, opportunities, how involved I want my real people to be, knowing that I have to raise the stakes, and there has to be a reason why the sleuth is going to risk everything to solve the crime, because there's no scope for just casual solving of a crime when you're a teenage girl in 1814. You're supposed to be doing what your parents tell you. Like, it has to be important. There has to be a good reason for it. And so then I have my suspect list, and then I start working through my plot, and then I figure out who done it. And then as I write the book, I always have to prove to myself that I made the right choice. And I always seem to be right. But there's a huge moment of doubt as I'm drafting it that I made the wrong choice of villain.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then somehow my subconscious works it all out back to the beginning.
Yeah. That's really interesting to me, about thinking about the crime and the motivation and everything first, and then trying to figure out which character did it. I love that. I really love to ask that question, because everybody comes at it with their own like method.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately you end up doing mostly the same things, having to figure out the pacing of it and how it plays out and what the motivation was and what are the twists and turns going to be and why and everything. But everybody comes at it in a different way. And I love that. I love that about writing in general, just that everybody kind of has to come to their own way of doing it. So you've got 3 books total. Are they coming out once a year?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And as it always goes, you have to find out if the series is going to be successful. And that's when you find out if you get more books.
Yeah.
So, I know the end date of these first 3 books is July 28th, 1814. And there's plenty more to be said if I have the opportunity. So we will see if people like the book.
Yeah. Yeah. So is the July 28th, 1814, is that a historical event?
Yes.
That you could tell us? That isn't the secret that the book.
It's, these are real people. So all you have to do is go on Wikipedia.
I'm writing this down. I'm going to go look it up.
So on July 28th, 1814, Mary Godwin at the time and her stepsister ran away with Percy Bysshe Shelley, a married man, and they fled from London to France. So they fled across the Channel.
So that's where you're getting to in the first 3.
Right.
So
what on earth led 2 16-year-olds to run away with a 21-year-old married man with 2 children, or a child and one on the way? And this was, even though these are middle-class people, these are not your average middle-class people either. They're literary people. They still ruined lives by making the choice they did, and not just their own choice. People died because of what they did. So, you really have to embody the mind of a 16-year-old, I think. As I've talked about Mary Shelley, I've said what drew me to her was what we had in common. Being really wannabe writers, growing up in a bizarre family with siblings that you weren't related to. And in her case, she's a daughter of fame. She had famous parents, but her mother died young. So there's that sort of pseudo relationship that isn't really there. But this was also a girl who got with a 21-year-old married man and lost her virginity to him next to her mother's grave. And that's kind of where she loses me and things we have in common. But it makes me so curious.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that, because we, and you pointed this out earlier, that we think of Mary Shelley as in the house with the contest where she writes Frankenstein and everything, and we don't really learn much about her ahead of time. And I love that you're taking an event and trying to explain it with an arc of stories. So that'll be very exciting. I'm super excited about that. That's really fun. So is there a possibility because you said, and I think anybody in book selling knows this is true too, that, it depends on sales and everything. So are the 3 books that lead up to that event a sure thing? And it's just if there's more after that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yep. So the next book is Death and the Visitors, and I have the cover, but it hasn't been official yet. So I don't think I can show it to you off camera, but probably not for YouTube.
Yeah, no, that's all right.
And then my plan for book 3 is Death and the Runaways, which makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then that would be 2025.
Wow. I can't believe we're even talking about that.
I know.
2025, no. Yeah, no, that's, I love that. I really, I'm just like letting that sink in. I love that you've taken okay, let's explain this, but we're going to take 3 books to get there. And that's really fun. So so is the second one's probably pretty well written then.
It's been turned in to my editor. So
I have by the time the first one's coming out and I'm talking to people, then the second one has probably pretty far along.
Yeah.
So do you have other historical figures that maybe you don't have like a planned book about, but that just really fascinate you and would be potential like characters in future projects?
I have a completed manuscript that my agent is shopping, and that one is not a real person, but it's an equally famous character in a book. So I did the same kind of treatment, but my main characters are living within a novel instead of living within real life.
Oh, interesting.
And then I have another similar idea of people that may or may not have been real, but they've been so thoroughly fictionalized that that's the approach I'm taking. I'm not going back to who they really were.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've got a list of real people that seem interesting enough that you could write a series about. And just, knowing I have to go to 2025 minimum with this and not knowing if I get to keep going. Yeah, it's like how many books do you write? How many ideas do you develop?
Yeah.
And
exactly.
And see what other people come up with, like that Abraham Lincoln idea. No sooner had I had that, I started researching it, and here's this book and that book.
Oh gosh, I've had that experience. Like, wait, that was my book.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think probably every writer in the world has had that. That happened to them at least once.
Yes, and when you're writing books like this, you're spending a lot of time on the research and development, and you don't want to blow it. So, I asked my agent, is this a good idea? Just in case she knows. And you look on Amazon and see, does anyone seem to have done this? No.
Yeah. And how long ago was it? And how well did they maybe do it?
And was it a major publisher or a minor publisher or self-published? Blah, 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 blah.
So I'm just curious what's the research process for you? Like, is it just sort of diving in and reading everything you can get your hands on, or how do you approach that? And then how do you keep it all from just becoming one giant blob in your head?
So this is kind of my baseline. This is the Miranda Seymour, Mary Shelley.
Okay.
And the very first book I think I read was Romantic Outlaws, which is a dual retelling of Mary and her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft. And then I have a lot of the fiction and a lot of the nonfiction writings, and looking a lot at Percy Bysshe Shelley. I'm surprised that there's as little or few biographies about him. But it seems like the interest is more to do with the greater circle, the people around him. Yeah. So I've read a bunch of those books. I've dipped into Byron biographies because they tend to be extremely detailed, and have not gotten into the letters much at all because most of that isn't extant for my little time period. Yeah. Mary's father, William Godwin, his minimal diary still exists. So I keep semi to that. And it's
Yeah.
really helpful to get ideas when I see who is visiting him in real life. There's an annotated version on it online, and they actually show the biographies of the people if I don't recognize the names.
Oh, that's
So
super helpful.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
The internet can be a wonderful thing.
oh, I don't know how I would have written historical fiction without it. I know I started trying to write for publication in 95, and I was terrified of historical research, even though I was fascinated by historical books. And the second thing I sold in 2005 was a historical fantasy, and I dreamed it, just like Mary Shelley dreamed the beginning of Frankenstein. And so that kind of gave me license, since I already had the idea. And then I went back into contemporary, and it took me until I think 2012 to get back to actually writing a full-on historical romance. And by then we have the internet. God bless it.
Yes. Oh, I know. I mean, it can be the bane of your existence, but sometimes getting a full annotated diary online is like, yay!
Yeah. I have printed copies of Dickens letters and printed copies of Mary Shelley letters, but generally speaking, that's like past the time period when they were better known. So they just turn out to not have the value. Other people have approached Dickens at different phases of his life. With Mary Shelley, they just seem to retell that summer 1816 over and over again.
Yeah.
And with Dickens, I had a dual approach. I was looking at his biography and the nonfiction he wrote. We know a fair amount of it, even though it didn't have his name on it back then, but lots of researchers have tried to figure it out. So I would have him writing his real nonfiction articles and living in his timeline, but I was also taking one of his novels and having that give me the themes, and the mystery I was creating for myself was the answer to why he came up with this novel idea. With Mary Shelley, she didn't write nearly as many novels.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to burn all her novels out as it was. And I also started writing her, like I said, at 16 instead of at 21 like Dickens. So in that sense, I'm approaching Mary Shelley very differently than I approached Charles Dickens. I was looking at Mary Shelley from the lens of a reader who might have enjoyed watching the Netflix show Wednesday, which referenced Mary Shelley. I was looking more at the vibe than I was looking at her novels. And this is, before she was writing anything that we know about. So I took a class about the literature of like the 1780s into this time period.
Yeah.
And so the story I'm having her write in my trilogy is a made up story that could be like Romance of the Forest or The Monk or these Minerva Press novels that were the popular junk reading of their day.
Yeah, that's so great. I love that.
And also because her parents were both novelists and philosophers, I'm doing far more referencing of their work than I am her work, because it had already been done.
Yeah.
And whether or not she read each and every book I'm reading, like I can never inhabit what they spent their time reading, because I spend most of my time reading cozy mysteries in my time, right? We don't have the same reading background, but I will at least take a Mary Wollstonecraft book or a William Godwin book, and I will do my best to embed myself in that one book. Right now I'm looking at St. Leon, which was William Godwin's second novel. And it's ultimately about how badly women were treated in that era, and that was fine, and what God's men were, and also alchemy. And so that's falling into book 3, but it also plays so much into how Mary Shelley got duped by Percy Bysshe Shelley.
Yeah.
She was raised to believe the words of gentlemen, and Percy Bysshe Shelley was presented as a gentleman who was going to save her family. And she bought all of it, just like his wife did, just like other girls did. He was charismatic and just bad. And so she ran away with him, just like his wife had when she was 16.
That's a lot. Maybe that's why people haven't written much about him. No, I think it's more because there's not a lot. I mean, I know that there's not
They've
a
written
ton
plenty
about him,
but yeah, it's more like works about his work rather than, there aren't too many just like straight up biographies of his.
Yeah. Do you get the sense that there isn't a ton of source material for a biography? I've always felt like we just don't know that much about
I feel
him.
like it seems like in academia, which I've never been a part of since college, that somebody writes the definitive biography of a certain era. And the person who wrote The Pursuit, I think maybe it's still definitive for this era. We haven't had an era change. Possibly like there hasn't been a new cache of letters discovered that would prompt someone to start working on a new dissertation that would be built.
That would turn into a book. And
I think there has to be a reason because, probably someone has to commission that.
Yeah. So what are you reading now? You said you like to read cozy mysteries. I'm always curious what people are reading themselves.
So I have St. Leon, which it's so painful to read as a grown woman and see how women were ground into dust. So I have to read it in bits and pieces until I can't take it anymore.
Yeah.
As this guy's wife and children are dying and he's being waited on hand and foot in the hopes that he will someday get his act together and take care of them again. And he's so dumb that the first thing he does when he gets out of bed is get himself thrown into prison. And the wife is fine with that. It drives me insane. And then I have a book about alchemy that I'm working my way through. And so that's my other nonfiction reading. And then I run a historical romance book club in the drawing room on Facebook. So right now I'm reading a book by Anna Bradley, who lives in Oregon. And that's our next read. We just announced it today. And then for cozy mysteries.
Anna Bradley?
It left my Kindle out in the other room, but it's a Duke book. It's a new one. It came out in August, I think.
That's all you have to say.
It's a gorgeous golden red cover, and it's a Duke book.
That's one of my running jokes at work. Is that the things I have learned about romance is that if you're in a romance novel about Scotland and you're male, you cannot wear a shirt, and there are also way more dukes than there really are dukes in the world.
Oh yeah.
It's like, where are you getting all these dukes from?
Nearly all the dukes in that era were Queen Victoria's uncles, and they were a bad bunch and nothing like you would want in a romance novel, though I have used them admittedly. And then I'm 4 books into Ginger Bolton's Deputy Donut cozy mystery series. I just finished the 4th one a day or 2 ago, so that's been my fun reads. And I also have an Amanda McCabe Harlequin historical underway. I started reading that as soon as I finished the 4th Ginger Bolton. So I have a historical romance on submission as well.
Oh, fun.
So keeping my hand in.
Facebook thing, is that something that is closed, or is that something that people could look up?
It should be, you should be able to find it. It's the Drawing Room Historical Romance Group. There's a bunch of us historical romance authors who are the patronesses of it. And you just have to do the usual thing, ask to join the group. And usually people get let in. And then I release a new commentary on chapters of a book every Tuesday. So today was my announcement day for the next book.
Okay. I will put that in the description so people can go find it if they would like to.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So it's out today. Have you done any fun? Are you going to do any fun, exciting book release day or week things?
So my big excitement was actually probably last week. I got my box of reader copies and I found my missing box of ARCs, which meant I still had
Oh,
to get reader
yay.
copies around the house. And my publicist, Jesse Cruz at Kensington, really went to town on the ARC. It was beautiful. It had,
Yes. Yeah.
fancy designs
I've
and,
got one
and it was
here. Yeah,
super
it's very
pretty.
pretty.
Yeah. So I had just been listening to like an inspirational talk by Brian Cohen about level up your existing audience. And so I just threw out an email and said, do you want to join my ARC team to my email list? And I got like 26 responses.
Oh, yay.
People
That's
like me,
awesome.
or at least they like free
That's
stuff.
exciting.
So I spent the next 3 days packaging books and taking them to the post office 3 different times.
That's wonderful. Though.
Yeah. So that,
well, the other thing that
fun.
I completely spaced it until just right now is this book's in the holiday catalog, isn't it?
It's kind of like a Halloween release. Like right now is when all
Oh,
the
okay.
Scoopy the spooky books are coming out. So they have a black cover. So there's a skull.
Yay.
It's a Halloween season read. So, and then obviously today we're chatting, and then I'm going up to Seattle on Monday, and I'm going to talk in person at the University of Washington bookstore, which is
fun.
really cool because it's my alma mater, and I even used to work in that bookstore. So I've never spoken at that particular one before. So that's going to be cool.
Be fun.
Yeah.
That's very exciting. Well, thank you so much for talking to us. I'm very excited for you. I'm super excited to see the whole arc play out. Now that I know the ending, I'm like, okay, now I need to know how we get there.
Yeah, me too. So, one book to finish figuring out.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll figure it out. I'm not worried. It'll be fine.
I'm at the phase where it's in that short story form, and I'm trying to persuade myself that it makes sense.
Yeah. No, I think I don't know of any author that doesn't have those days where you're like, I'm just gonna go get a job at McDonald's. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. And then it's fine. The next day is fine. But everybody goes through that. Well, I hope it goes well.
Thank you.
And I will just let everybody know that our copies of Death and the Sisters did not unfortunately arrive today. We are waiting on them, but they should be in the store tomorrow if you want to pick one up. We have announced our book club books for October. And I'm totally blanking on the cozy mystery. It has to do with something with poison pie. But if you go to the website, you'll find it. We're also reading the sci-fi fantasy book club is reading She Who Became the Sun. The mystery book club meets every second Tuesday at 2:00, and the sci-fi fantasy meets the second Saturday at 2:00. So we'll be looking for that. We are also really excited because we get to be the bookseller for an event at the Fort Vancouver Community or Regional Library at their Vancouver Community Branch. They are hosting J.A. Jance the 7th of October. So we get to be the bookseller for that. We're super excited. So you can either get your book ahead of time or at the event. The only thing the library has said is that it is a free event. Be sure to get there soon or early because they expect it to fill up. So that's what's happening next few weeks at the bookstore. Oh, and it's banned book week next week. So read a banned book next week. Anyway, so that's what's coming up. Thank you again, Heather, for being with us tonight. I really, really appreciate it. And
thank you, Christy. It's good to see you again. Bye-bye.
Have a good night.